You've turned down Harvard for rock and roll.
Yeah. I tried to dress it up a little bit better because it sounds better. But truth is, yes.
Welcome to Breaking In, where I share how to break into Wall Street from unconventional backgrounds. Today, Marco Caneva shares how he got into Goldman Sachs as an international engineering student using his contacts in soccer and rock and roll.
I noticed an accent. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Italy. I was born and raised there till the tender age of, 25 when I first moved to the U.S.
How did that happen? You went to college in Italy. Why did you decide to come to the U.S. for your MBA?
I have a BSc in chemical engineering from the university in Italy. As I was looking for a job at the end of my stint as a Navy officer, I attended a job fair in Brussels where my CV had been selected because of my grades and what I'd done to that point. The comment that I got more often from the recruiters were, "Oh, you're just an engineer?" Which kind of left me confused because I thought that was, enough. I went back home from Brussels and realized that I had to go back to school. I spent the next year and a half, my real job as an engineer, and applying to US schools. These are the early days of the internet. It's not that you had a lot of info out there. And I'm by myself in Genoa. I had to go through, the GMAT by myself, the test of English as a foreign language by myself, and I applied to 3 schools. I know Harvard is ranked top at the time. I applied to HBS. I applied to MIT because I'm an engineer. Where else would you apply? And then I really wanted to be in LA. I applied to UCLA. MIT said no. HBS actually said yes, but then UCLA said yes. And I figured, I really want to be in Los Angeles. Crazy things someone does. My parents didn't really know the difference between Harvard and UCLA and said, sure, that works. I moved to Los Angeles and went to UCLA. At the time, it was ranked number 7 in the country.
So you turned down Harvard.
I actually did. When I left for the US, I wanted to do 2 things. 1, be involved in the music business. 2, I wanted to be a management consultant. I figured being in LA, UCLA, having an MBA would combine the 2 things. My ideal scenario was I'm going to be a consultant in the music business for a few years, and then I'm going to be an entrepreneur in the music business because I can't play any instrument, I can't sing, but I love music. I thought that was the great combo.
It wasn't just to be right next to Sunset Strip.
Well, there was an element of that. After all, I could have gone to USC, UCLA, because it's on, especially the Anderson School, is on Sunset Boulevard. It was about 10 miles from the Sunset Strip. Even if at the time the scene was almost dead, there was still a lot of music being played at the Whiskey A Go, at the Roxy. I tried to take advantage of that as well.
You've turned down Harvard for rock and roll.
Yeah. I tried to dress it up a little bit better because it sounds better. But truth is, yes. Yes, I did.
As a stock analyst, I like to look at what is the one thing that made the difference. And I think rock and roll was the one thing. Now you're at UCLA.
Yeah.
English is your second language.
Yes.
Your citizenship is Italian. As a foreign student, how did you approach getting a job and breaking into Wall Street?
My initial idea was that I was going to go for one of the large consulting firms. BCG was my first pick. Any of the 3. I did a lot of work before moving to LA. I went and met with BCG in Milan. I went and met with Bain and McKinsey to let them know that I was going to have my MBA in the US and then come back and potentially join them. I did all of that networking part pre-MBA so that I could secure a summer job at one of the 3. Got an offer from all 3 to spend my summer with them. But by the time I got the offer and I said yes to BCG, I started taking finance courses at UCLA. I fell in love with it because the math part really spoke to me. I decided to veer away from consulting and into investment banking. I started reading a ton of books over the summer, but at that point I lost the train. Or I thought I had, because most of the people that wanted to be on Wall Street were spend the summer on Wall Street. A lot of my classmates, a lot of friends. I came back from my summer internship with BCG in September, and I started calling everyone I knew in Italy that knew someone within investment banks in London, because I figured my edge is being part of an Italian team with an MBA in the US. I called everyone who knew everyone, And through connections, I secured interviews with Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman. Goldman at that point, you need some lucky breaks, had an opening which was rather unusual for a first-year associate in the Italian team in London, because the guy that they had over the summer either didn't work out with him or had decided to take a job somewhere else. They found themselves short of an associate. I started the interview process. I went through 21 interviews at Goldman Sachs, 21. The first I did on the phone. Then they had me meet people at the LA office. Then another round on the phone. Then they flew me to London, where I was there for a couple of days. I think I saw 13 bankers and HR guys. And then 2 more when I got back. And at that point, I got a call in the middle of the night saying that I had the offer.
Wow.
Yeah.
You said you called everybody you knew.
Yeah.
But you'd done your junior internship at Boston Consulting Group, not in investment banking.
Yeah.
And before that, you were an engineer in Italy. How in the world would your network show up with people that you knew at Goldman Sachs?
In Italy, there are 2 universities that the US banks tap into straight out of college for the analyst program. One of them is in Milan, and it's Bocconi University. Through both my sort of rock and roll network and my soccer fan network, I knew enough people that graduated from there that had not necessarily gone to work for Goldman or UBS, but they had friends there. I was relentless in calling anyone that I knew that had graduated from Bocconi in those years to see if someone knew somebody. And that's how I got in touch with some of these guys.
It's even easier and more fun to call them because they're friends from rock and roll or from soccer. It doesn't just feel you're only reaching out to them because you want a favor. You already know them.
Exactly.
But it's surprising because, first of all, you're in Italy, and you wouldn't think you have all these opportunities through those different networks that would seem at first to have nothing to do with investment banking. That's super creative.
And I managed to pay back the friend that connected me with the guy at Goldman because this friend of mine wanted to come to UCLA for his master's. I wrote a recommendation letter for him to join the UCLA MBA program the year after I graduated.
Oh, cool.
So,
Tell me some crazy story about a day in the life at Goldman Sachs. What was it like? You joined during a crazy time in terms of M&A.
I joined at the tail end of the internet boom. Valuations through the roof, much like today. One IPO after the other because anyone.com was IPOing. Something you experienced yourself, especially as a junior person. You have no control over your time. I literally worked 80 to 90 hours a week nonstop for the first year and a half. One of the craziest was at one point we were working on a merger between a US and an Italian company. I finally got my parents and my grandmother to fly up to London for the weekend to visit me. They had not been to London to see where I was living yet. The 3 of them fly up on Friday. I spend the entire day at the office. I get back at midnight. They're already asleep. The following morning, we have breakfast, and I tell them that not only do I need to go back to the office, actually at 2 p.m., I'm flying to Turin to be with a client because we're going to announce on Monday. I asked them to please stay in London till I got back. I got back on Monday night. We announced on Tuesday morning, and I'm very gracious with them. He shipped me home at noon on Tuesday. I could finally spend some time with the family. When you're a first, a second year associate, or an analyst, you have no control over your life. That was one of the non-fun parts. There are also a lot of those where you pull an all-nighter and you're crazy enough to think that at 5 p.m. after having been up for 33 hours, it makes sense to go out and have a beer with your friends because that's what you are. Your friends are in the trenches with them. That's why certain bonds are formed as a junior person. A network that I have today is because these are guys that I worked with elbow to elbow and shoulder to shoulder for so long and in such intense moments.
So how long did you stay?
10 years. Yeah.
What made you leave? Do you wish you stayed?
I am grateful, and I had such a great time. I'm not saying that it wasn't stressful. There have been moments you can imagine where tiresome, frustrating, but I really loved what what I did. I love all the strategy behind it. I love negotiations. I love valuation exercises. I also love the guys I worked with. But then you remember 2008. It was not a fun time. '07 was a record year for Goldman Sachs because during the subprime crisis, while Wall Street turned right, Goldman turned left, largely short of subprime. We had a record year. We also thought, like most, that the situation was not going to deteriorate quickly and badly. And then we all know how it went. It stopped being fun for a long time because everyone around me was getting fired. By October, November, he would walk the floors and half of the cubicles and 1/3 of the offices looked empty. At the same time, I was working on a relatively complicated deals involving multiple parties, but where one of the largest parties in this transaction was a very wealthy family from my hometown in Italy, in Genoa. They had just sold 2 of their businesses for an insane amount of money. They were setting up a family office and a financial holding, and they needed someone. I think the combination of these 2 things, I felt like my time in London had come up. Investment banking was becoming a little less fun. When do you get the opportunity to switch careers and learn, rather than being an advisor, what being a principal is? You put it all together, and I handed in my resignation at the beginning of 2009 and moved back to Italy and started this new chapter with a family office.
Looking back, there's people that are career Goldman people, and then people that build wealth by saying the first half of my career Goldman and do other things, be an entrepreneur or go on the buy side. Do you wish you'd stayed at Goldman? Investment banking gets a lot more fun when the market's up, and then it gets less fun when the market's down. It's cyclical.
Yes and no. There's 2 ways to have a successful career at a place like Goldman Sachs or, Blackstone or any of those. One is you have wind in your sails because you are in the right spot and the right team at the right time, and you're really good too. Your career accelerates. The other way is to be really patient and just be a company guy. And therefore, you're there. It doesn't matter if it takes a little longer. Some get there in 5 years, some get there in 10. There's merit in being patient in a place like Goldman Sachs, which will reward your commitment. From a risk-reward perspective, I think that would have made a lot of sense because that's the career, the place. And the more senior you become, to be honest with you, make more money. There's more politics and less work on the ground. It is a great way of securing your future and potentially for your children. You might not get the big bang, but it's very financial. Sacrifices are that a job like that ultimately sucks the life out of you because you might not spend 100 hours a week in the office anymore, but the number of calls that you still have on Saturdays, Sundays, the committees, the politics, it's very stressful every day. You have very little control over your own life. Because no matter how senior you are, if something important happens, they yank you out and you've got to fly to wherever you've got to fly. The alternative is to change to being on the buy side. It's a higher risk reward profile because you've got to take more risk. Potentially the reward is higher. For me, it was really about learning new skills. I wanted to understand what it is like to deploy capital when you need to make a decision, do I want to buy this asset or not? Because as a banker, what you want to do is you just want to make the deal happen. Here is, do I want this deal? Do I think that this is the right asset that I want to purchase? And it's a completely different skill set that I wanted to hone.
Interesting. My boss, when I worked at Palantir Capital, the hedge fund, he used to say, the real tough work is when you're managing a company. I can sell my problems. There's a continuum where the bankers just want the deals to happen. The investors want to have something they can hold, but if things go wrong, they can sell it. And the companies are way at the other end of the spectrum where if the problems happen, they got to fix the problems.
As a family office, you own companies. And we made large investments, and I'm talking hundreds of millions of euros, but the companies that we own 100% of, they're all small. And I was on the board of all of them. You have to change your mindset from, I have a deal in the pipeline and I just want to find a solution that the deal happens. As a banker, you have a mandate to make a deal happen. That's all you're focused on. Being a principal instead is you got to flip your mindset 180. Someone suggests an investment And you got to learn to think, I think this investment is a bad idea. Now convince me otherwise, at least as a family office, because you get pitched so many ideas that you can't really go after all of them. And then there's the day-to-day, in particular of the small company, because if you're the chairman of a 50 million euro turnover company, you're not the chairman. You're there for everything. You're a little bit of the head of sales. You're a little bit the CFO. You're a little bit of whatever is needed, because you're not talking about an organized, structured entity. It's a small organization. And those are the toughest, because those are problems that you face day in, day out. It's not, I made an investment, I hope it goes the way it's supposed to go, or the better, make the deal happen. Now I'm going to get my fee and move on to the next one.
You're on a couple of company boards now. What was it like being put on the board for a family office versus earning a board seat like you have now?
When it's part of your portfolio, you're on the board by virtue of the fact that you own the company. That's how you learn how to be a board member, because especially in those situations where you have other shareholders, you have to make sure that you understand the mandate that the board members have, your role of a director, even if you have no powers. And there are all sorts of legal implications, but also the mantra is, I am here in the interest of all stakeholders. I'm here in the interest of the company. That's the refrain you have in your mind every time you have to make a decision.
The family office own a big chunk of the company, so you're by default coming in as a board member. Are you looked at as contrary to the management and the rest of the board?
That's the position I took, because especially with small companies, what happens is the CEO, because he has so much to do, tends to take shortcuts. And the best way to make sure that the reporting is correct, that sales are trending the right way, that we're focused on cash flow and all of that, you have to challenge all of that. It was always a little tough in the sense that I had to challenge them in making sure that things were done properly, as if we're going to bring in new investors tomorrow. If we had to bring in someone new into this company tomorrow, are we ready for it? And can we show that we've done things properly? That was the mindset. Outside of the confinement of the boardroom, you need to talk to these guys. You need to go and meet them. You need to sit down with the CEO saying, I am not a pain in your neck for the sake of being a pain in your neck. And I'm here to help. Let's make sure that I am here to support you, but also be aware that I want things done in a certain way. That kind of translated relatively easily into my new role as an independent when I got brought on board by other companies where I have no affiliation with it whatsoever. Because of what I learned over those years in the family office, I tend to make it clear from the get-go that I might be a bit of a pain in the neck, but that if we establish the way forward, I think everybody will be better off. I like investing time and working with people. I go and visit the companies regularly outside of what the board meetings are.
Sounds like curiosity was a real engine for you. Looking back, if somebody said, I want to know the path to build real wealth, what would you advise them in terms of starting in investment banking? Where would they go next?
I think starting at a large organization, being a consulting firm or an investment bank straight out of college gives you two things. One, you learn to live with a lot of pressure early on, because those are pressure cookers. You need to learn how to deliver when you're tired, when you think, I would really like to take a break and go on vacation. But you learn how things are done in a big, well-oiled machine. You learn a lot of skills, and your network, your exposure to some of the top tier clients in the world and being part of a global organization, I think are all great foundations to build your career on. I personally think that someone starting in investment banking or in consulting right now, looking for the opportunity to generate the wealth that people were able to generate 30 years ago is no longer there. I think it's going to become more and more difficult. It's still going to be very rewarding, but you're not going to make the level of money when Goldman Sachs was a private partnership, an IPO in the late 90s.
How long would you stay at one of these big firms? Do you think 10 years was the right amount before you moved?
I think if you stay 10 years, it becomes more difficult to completely switch career. I think the real wealth opportunities are more on the buy side. You need to think that the next step is either a hedge fund or a private equity fund or some form of edgy asset management firm, because that's where your comp is a lot more tied to the wealth you create for your clients. I think you want to jump into that relatively early on in your career. If you're straight out of college and you join Morgan Stanley and then you're thinking, I want to really make it big, I think by year 3, at the end of your analyst program, first year associate, that's when you need to look for joining the buy side and looking at private equity. Even if you want to be in tech, the exposure that you can get to certain tech companies by virtue of being at one of the large banks is pretty big. But at that point, I think it's almost easier if you do investment bank, VC fund, and then tech company.
Thank you so much for your time today,
You're
Marco.
very welcome. It was a blast. Thanks again for having me.